For years, it feels like I've been watching the same movies over and over. With remake fatigue, nothing's real. Everything's a copy of a copy of a copy. If you look at the highest grossing movies of the last few years, almost all of them fall into the same categories: sequels, remakes, or adaptations of existing IP. So why does the lion's share of financing, promotion, and box office success seem increasingly hoarded by a handful of titles? Is it intrinsic to the quality of the films? They're just the best movies, obviously? Or is there something else going on other than, money? In this video, I want to look at three things. First, why adaptations have always been a part of storytelling. Second, why modern Hollywood seems stuck adapting the same handful of stories over and over and over again. And finally, why some of the most exciting adaptations right now are happening outside the Hollywood system entirely. The depth of human creativity and imagination in telling stories likely goes back as far as language itself. Long before cinema or novels, we were gathered around fires, telling stories to one another, not always our own stories, but tales that had already been told many times before, passed from storyteller to storyteller, and while the details shift, the core truth remains, the essence of it, the myth. Basically, we've been adapting and remaking stories forever. It almost seems somewhat integral to being a human being. Folk stories and fairy tales, Shakespeare's endless adaptations, the mythologies of entire religions. These stories endure through time and influence our societies in massive ways. So stories aren't just frivolous entertainment. They're powerful enough that people who believe in them are sometimes willing to die or kill because of them. And I'm not just talking about religious stories. The Catcher in the Rye, Taxi Driver, The Matrix, and Joker have all been linked to real-world acts of violence. The stories we tell and the stories Hollywood chooses to tell and retell don't just reflect society, they can influence it. Which is why it's worth asking, especially when certain stories become overwhelmingly dominant, who's telling the story, why are they telling it, and who does that story ultimately benefit? And those questions bring us to one of the most dominant mythologies in modern Hollywood, which is, of course, superhero movies. Superhero films have existed for over a century, as far back as 1916's Judex, whose masked vigilante is often seen as a precursor to characters like Batman. But for most of film history, they appeared only sporadically, a superhero film here, a Batman film there, and a couple of TV shows. It wasn't until the late 90s and early 2000s that the genre truly exploded, which is of course in part because of advancements in CGI technology, making superhero stunts and powers more believable. Nowadays, the Marvel Cinematic Universe alone consists of over 37 films, with more released every year. This is a list of all the DC superhero projects according to a Reddit user, so I'm doing serious research. There's no denying that superheroes have become the most dominant storytelling framework in modern Hollywood. And of course, many of these films are quite good, depending on your taste. Like as a kid, I really liked the Tobey Maguire Spider-Mans. I think Logan is a great film, and Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy helped push the genre into darker, more grounded territory. But increasingly it feels like there's less focus on character and more on spectacle, less emotional depth and more quippy dialogue.
And if it's color we need, let's bring the rainbow.
And besides money, part of the reason these films endure is because they're comforting, familiar, predictable, and in times of uncertainty, economic, political, personal, they offer a kind of escapism, which is exactly what concerns people like Alan Moore. Moore, writer of Watchmen, suggested that the current adult obsession with comic book superheroes is culturally catastrophic. He argued that our embrace of what were originally children's characters reflects a retreat from admittedly overwhelming complexities complexities of modern existence. Superhero films are often criticized for reinforcing the status quo rather than challenging it. Villains might raise interesting philosophical ideas about inequality, corruption, and power, but these ideas are quickly undermined by turning them into cartoonishly evil figures. Instead of ordinary people organizing, protesting, and challenging systems of power, the world is saved by a handful of extraordinary individuals, often backed by the government, people with immense power who ultimately restore the same system that produced the problem in the first place. So this is a personal theory, and I don't know, maybe it's a bit of a stretch, you tell me. I think it's interesting that when you grow up with these kind of stories and they're so widely proliferated in society, you know, where evil is exaggerated, theatrical, and almost inhuman, it can distort how we recognize it in real life. So when people are confronted with genuine harm, abuse, or corruption, especially when it's systemic, there's almost this instinct to mythologize it, to turn those people into something monstrous or unreal, like they must be some sort of exception to humanity. And I think that when we push evil into the realm of fantasy, it can actually make it harder to confront the fact that it exists within ordinary systems and ordinary people, but not lizard people.
She's just like, yeah, take them on, but you want to fight? You're gonna get one, you inhuman, soulless pieces of trash. And I know our species is stronger than you and better than you. We're gonna beat your ass. Get that through your head.
But the cool thing about art and cinema is it's often in conversation with itself. And without these endless superhero films, we might not have the very interesting satirical response to it. Another adaptation from a comic book.
Graphic novel.
Sorry, it's an adaptation of a graphic novel.
Totally different.
The Boys. Rather than celebrating superheroes, it flips the premise entirely. The real threat isn't a supervillain, it's the corporate and political machine that manufactures, markets, and protects superheroes in the first place. And the theatre of their fighting only exists to distract the masses, while undertaking their real goal of propaganda, power, and money with no real care for the harm caused along the way. Unlike franchises like The Avengers, The Boys was always intended for adults. It's not escapism, it's confrontation. It responds to a world saturated with superhero mythology. I think it's interesting that, you know, with cinema, we're not just consuming stories, we're also having a conversation through them. And what we choose to make popular says something about what we believe, and also perhaps what we're no longer willing to believe. Some of the greatest films ever made are adaptations or remakes. The Godfather, The Thing, There Will Be Blood, The Exorcist, No Country for Old Men. And yet they don't feel like repeated content because they weren't made to exploit familiarity. They were made to interpret something, to translate a story into a new medium with care, intention, and a clear creative vision. In many cases, they're the first time that story has been brought to the screen, or they take an existing idea and push it somewhere new. And audiences can feel that difference, and it's what we are hopeful for whenever a new adaptation or remake is announced. When news broke that a new version of The Exorcist was in development, the reaction was excitement, but also anxiety. And a common sentiment that I saw over and over was, please don't mess this up. Then there's the reaction to the announcement of a remake of Bloodsport, which seems to be mostly why and please don't. And those reactions are quite telling. It's not just that people don't want, a bad movie, it's also that they feel protective over certain stories. You see this on a massive scale with something like Star Wars, with fans arguing that under Disney, the series has lacked a cohesive vision, there's inconsistent quality across the new projects, and even that characters' changes have retroactively tarnished themselves. On one hand, people are thrilled to return to that world, but on the other hand, there's this lingering feeling that something has been diluted, stretched out, and turned into just content for cynical, monetary reasons. When an adaptation strays too far from what made the original meaningful, or worse, feels like it's only using the name for recognition, it starts to feel like something is being taken rather than created, like the name is doing all the work. Simon Pegg talked about this when people kept asking if he'd ever reboot Shaun of the Dead. He shut it down immediately and said doing so would be a cynical and exploitative exercise. And that's kind of the fear with a lot of these projects. He also mentioned that while he liked Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead, he hated that they used the same title as George Romero's seminal film. Because, as he said, when you just take a title because people recognize it, it's so disrespectful to the original. And that's how many people feel about certain projects, myself included. I actually recently made a video on the new adaptation of Wuthering Heights, which I saw right after finishing the book. I don't know how it could have been worse. And it was so different, in my opinion, like tonally and thematically, that it felt less like an adaptation and more like a cynical IP grab and a bit of like a bait and switch, to be honest. And of course, whilst the people with the IP, or when something is public domain, like Wuthering Heights, you know, they have the freedom to do whatever the hell they like with it. But it doesn't change the fact that audiences and fans often feel a sort of protection of their beloved characters and stories. So whilst the question isn't just whether you can, it's also whether you should. However, on the other hand, I believe art should have very few limits. Like when Winnie the Pooh's copyright ran out, there was immediately a schlocky B-grade horror film called Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. Is it any good? No. But it's interesting that it exists. Its existence speaks to a human impulse not just to preserve stories, but to distort them, challenge them, and even desecrate them. My favorite example of this is Garfield, and if you haven't seen the video essay, What the Internet Did to Garfield by Super Eyepatch Wolf, I highly recommend it, as it's a pretty massive iceberg, but basically the internet started transforming the rather light-hearted comic series into an existential horror nightmare where John is ruled by a Machiavellian Garfield. So, on one hand, audiences want stories to be treated with care. On the other, creativity often comes from pushing, twisting, or even destroying what came before. And where Hollywood tends to struggle is in treating stories primarily as intellectual property, as assets to be managed, endlessly dipping into the same well over and over again. Which might explain why some of the most interesting, unexpected, and genuinely alive adaptations today aren't coming from Hollywood at all.
Call it.
No, no thank you. So if the biggest, most funded, most visible stories are stuck repeating themselves, then where does anything new actually come from? And I think increasingly the answer is outside of Hollywood entirely. Some of the most interesting adaptations right now are coming from smaller creators, internet culture, and stories that already have an audience but haven't been exhausted yet. If a big part of why Hollywood keeps adapting the same IP is because of built-in fan bases, then there are so many other stories out there with just as much potential. And that is happening with people seeing great success. Take Iron Lung, for example. Written, directed, produced, and self-financed by YouTuber Markiplier, based on the 2022 game by David Zemansky, apologies. Driven by passion, Markiplier funded the project independently to maintain creative control, and it paid off. On a $3 million budget, the film has grossed around $52 million. And what's especially interesting is the relationship between creator and audience. Markiplier originally played the game on his channel, boosting its popularity, which in turn built excitement for the film.
That was actually excellent. That was incredible. I really loved that experience.
And it shows that recognizing the right story and understanding how it could translate cinematically can be just as powerful as creating something from scratch. Then there's Backrooms. I'm sure you're probably aware of the internet phenomenon known as the Backrooms, but just in case you're not, it all started on 4chan in 2019 when someone posted a blurry, angled photo of a carpeted yellow room with fluorescent lights and claimed it to be the place you go when you no-clip out of reality through the walls or floor. The Backrooms are a prominent example of liminal spaces, places that feel unsettling because they are empty or out of context, like hotel hallways or unused dated office spaces. Since the original post, the concept concept of the backrooms has grown through online communities like Reddit that add lore such as multiple levels of different spaces and lurking malicious entities. Independent filmmaker Kane Parsons brought it to life with a series of found footage videos on YouTube, where he introduced a narrative about a scientific research institute discovering the complex. The series was a massive success, and at just 18 years old, he partnered with A24 to develop it into a feature film, becoming the studio's youngest ever director. Backrooms comes out May 29th, and I will definitely be doing a video on it, so subscribe if you want to see that. So the point isn't that we need completely original stories only. Adaptations exist for a reason. The problem is that Hollywood continues to draw from the same well, when there's an entire ocean of stories out there that people already care about, especially on the internet or indie gaming. Personally, I'd love to see the Reddit story How to Survive in Hell adapted, or a proper TV series based on House of Leaves if someone could figure out how to do it justice. But yeah, I do think things are starting to shift, and hopefully the success of projects like Iron Lung and Backrooms is enough to prove that audiences aren't tired of adaptations and remakes. They're just tired of the same ones.
Yeah, take them on, but you want to fight?
So that's the video. Thank you so much for watching and making it to the end. Please let me know in the comments below some of your favorite stories that you would love to see adapted on the big screen. Please like and subscribe if you want to. Hope to see you in the next one. Tails?